for all to see. The signs we've lost our way. When we jail our heroes and applaud our villains and turn our hearts away. Like a silent choir, too scared to sing the anthem of a braver day. The Ballad of Dr. Bruce Paix.
There he is. When they jail our heroes and applaud our villains. Yes, that's how the song goes. And here's the hero of the ballad that was done by Michael Gray Griffith and Esther Unitas. And yeah, that was a little while ago now, mate. But just the old the story behind that song keeps popping up every now and then because there's good reason for it too. Because our government, politicians, judiciary, bureaucrats, things just haven't really changed a great deal, have they, Master Bruce? They haven't really changed a lot, have they?
They haven't changed for the better, I'll give you that.
No, that's exactly right. You'd think they would, but yeah. Anyway, that's why we keep doing what we're doing, Bruce. Is even though at times, people would admit that at times we're probably speaking within our own echo chamber, and it doesn't get through to the other 85% that are still wired into the matrix of ABC, 7, 9, 10, all that sort of SBS. But anyway, we do our bit and hopefully get people a bit of education to prepare themselves a bit better for the future anyway, give them hopefully some tools and awareness about the way things are going. So anyway, I might get people when they are jumping on the Clo Rumble. I had to redo the streaming key on the Cafe Locked-Out Rumble, so I'm hoping that that's all streaming okay. So if people are on the Clo Rumble or any of them, like Facebook or X or the South Australian Focus Rumble or the Clo Rumble, if you want to pop in some comments, that'd be appreciated to let us know that everything is firing well for us on this Monday evening, the 20th of October 2025, Bruce, and it's another month just about gone into November. Valerie, thank you. Facebook seems to be going okay. Valerie, good to see you. Thanks for popping that up in there. We'll see how the others are going and see if we've got things going on. So a bit of rain around, which is nice. Not enough, not as much as what we'd really like. We had some nice warmer weather here in Adelaide, and then some cooler weather. It drops down pretty quickly, like they say, 4 seasons in one day. Sometimes over here in Adelaide, a bit like there where you are as well, isn't it, mate?
Yeah, well, I zipped over to Adelaide yesterday. Almost, I was in Tailem Bend for a few hours and then quick in and out on the day, and it was pretty stormy in Tailem Bend, although it didn't actually rain.
Well, Valerie jumped across to X as well. You're straddling a couple of platforms there. Good on you. There you go, X as well. And there we go. Fabled Mansions, loud and clear on Rumble. Good on you guys. So we're coming through loud and clear, Bruce. That is good to see. That's a good start for a Monday stream show. So that's okay. Or you reckon we crack into it?
Why don't you start this one?
Should we make for a nice change again? Well, I won't blabber too much, mate. But anyway, I just wanted to remind people, being a bit, Adelaidean and a bit of an event. And obviously, as people know, I'm involved with Australians for Better Government. Just a bit of a reminder that this Sunday coming up, which is the 26th of October, it's time's come. We've got the revival, Australians for Better Government. So tickets are still available. Also, if people don't want to buy online of the human ticks, you can buy at the door on the day. So if you're there near the Sporting Car Club of South Australia down there, you can buy tickets at the door, but also jump on the human ticks as well. Bit of a reminder there of Dr. Christopher Reynolds is Australian historian, talking about the Constitution, other sort of stuff. Michael Arbin, great political commentator, was an advisor to Senator Ralph Babbitt, and Mark Aldridge, leader United Voice, and Stephen Tripp, obviously president. Councillor Henry Davis from Adelaide City Council, and of course myself there, having a bit of a yarn as well. So anybody wants to jump along to that, But also, Bruce, I thought, and I'm not sure yet. I might see if we get a comment first from our friend Carla. But she sent me a bit of she poked me on Facebook and wanted to kind of just have a bit of a reminder about this event in Adelaide as well. This is Beat the Reset team, so Tim Manger and 2033, The Great Reset, which is a book launch here in Adelaide as well. I believe they're heading over to the west as well, but Adelaide on Thursday at the Marion Hotel and Cellars. So there you go, Carla. Seeing that you poked me to, I suspect there's a little bit of a mention. So there we go. We've given a mention there for Tim and the team of the Great Reset. So if you haven't heard of him, just check out some of his YouTube channels as well. Talk about a lot of stuff around gold, silver, Bitcoin, which Bruce often talks about on our show as well. So thought I'd give those couple of plugs because Bruce talks about all of that quite extensively on most of our episodes. So there you go. Tickets still available for that as well for the book launch. But Bruce, it's something that I wanted to focus on. I'm not going to go into detail with much today, but I just wanted to focus on one thing. But I wanted to play a little bit of a video. I mean, you probably would have seen it, and I'm not even sure whether you're going to cover that because we don't normally talk. But I'm going to play this, Bruce, just as a bit of a reminder. And again, this just goes to show that you and I generally don't talk too much about what you're going to deliver on the show. So hopefully I'm not massively gazumping you with this, but I'm just going to play a little bit of this here first before we run in.
The people that came to pick the fight with police were the issue-motivated groups on the left. I can tell you that the March for Australia group, they were peaceful, they were engaging, they listened to our instructions, they did what they were told, and they protested by example. This is what was thrown at police today, and I think Melbourne has had a gutful. I look on the social media streaming platforms of some of these issue-motivated groups that are saying police used excessive force. The fact was, these were being thrown at police. Bottles filled with shards of glass were being thrown at the police. Rotten fruit was being thrown at police. Bins were put on fire. Flags were on fire. And I think, really enough's enough. The disruption to Melbourne, to the general public who want to come into our fine city, the disruption to businesses, we really need to find an answer of what we do. These are people who come, they're not coming to protest. I heard the Chief Commissioner talk about protesters having compassion and care for others. This is certainly not what has been displayed today. People came to pick a fight with the police. The people that came to pick the fight with police were the issue-motivated groups on the left. I can tell you that the March for Australia group, they were peaceful, they were engaging, they listened to our instructions, they did what they were told, and they protested by example. The other group, and there were a number of issue-motivated groups known to us, we knew they were coming. We had to deploy hundreds of police. These hundreds of police, not only today, but the man hours and the weeks of planning, preparation, engagement with these people, and the impact on Victoria Police resources at a time when we should be having police on the front line looking at community safety, it appalls me really. And I'm being really strong, and I show you the rocks because I think the public need to see what the police are being targeted with. We deployed force against these people, and rightly so in my view. It was a force at the level nearly that we had at the Land Forces Defence expedition or exhibition earlier in the year. We had police injured. I have a sergeant, a female sergeant who went to hospital with a suspected broken hand because she was kicked at. I have a member with a nasty gash on his leg from Corio. We are drawing police resources from all around the state to police this protest activity in Victoria, in Melbourne, and it happens every week without fail. Now, there are people that legitimately come to protest, but there are people who don't. And I think the Chief Commissioner is reviewing our response to how we protest and what our model looks forward, because To me, and I'm a senior member of Victoria Police, I've been in this organisation 39 years, the impost and the impact it's having on the members working every weekend and on frontline community safety is massive. So I take...
Just going to stop it there. Now, there's a couple of things, obviously. There's a couple of things I'm going to pick up on. One thing I want to remind people, obviously I'm not making any excuse here for police in Melbourne, because you and I have often talked on the show about the brutality enacted upon peaceful protesters during COVID that really were just pushing back against the lockdowns, right? Now, I want to stress that, and I want to go back to that, is I want to reiterate that peaceful protests, and these people were pushing back on tyranny enacted upon them by a government and really just didn't have a voice anymore. And they didn't throw missiles, they didn't throw rocks, they were there peacefully, and they were cornered and pushed into the Shrine of Remembrance and shot upon by Victoria Police. So I'm not going to jump up and down and talk about how those protesters, but what you can clearly hear is a frustration there that I picked up on was he's talking about weekly protests. So clearly talking about the pro-Palestine mob, the anti-fascist mobs that are there every weekend drawing resources, and it's been going on for months and months and months, and the media applaud it, politicians applaud it, they've all been jumping on it, and the police clearly now are over it, seeing that these protesters have bought rocks and projectiles and thrown it, and he didn't hold back in saying that the March for Australia mob were actually peaceful, because this is what we've always done on the centre, the conservative side, the centre right of politics. They have gone out and peacefully protested every single time, including during COVID, apart from what you saw at the CFMEU. And I think those people were mainly frustrated at the CFMEU for undermining them during COVID. Where were they with all the mandates and everything? And they took a lot of frustration out on the CFMEU, and I believe there was some violence there, and they trashed the building and all that. But all through the last 5 years and to now has been, you have the majority of violence you've seen has been from the left, has been from the anti-fascists, and has continued to be from the left. And you could see, I had vision of them bringing their umbrellas. So they were prepared for the pepper spray. They had the rocks and they had all this projectile stuff all planned. And, it is a massive own goal, what they've given themselves. But one of the big uproars about all of that, Bruce, let's take that off the table now. One of the big uproars out of all that is the way that our media portrayed it. Now I'm going to bring this up here. Yeah. Now this is getting massive, and this is even our Channel 7. Now I noticed that they've either blocked me on Facebook or pulled the post, but I still found it here on X. So this is how they reported, this is 7 News Adelaide and also 7 Adelaide. Police officers have been injured after clashing with protesters countering anti-mass immigration demonstrations in Melbourne. And so they show those photos there, but then they show a photo of a patriotic Australian guy holding an Australian flag. Where was the picture, Bruce, of the anti-fascists throwing rocks and targeting police and carrying on? Why would the media, as usual, Seven apparently has pulled so many of their posts down because of the backlash they've received from them not reporting accurately, and none of the other media have, is they didn't call out the anti-fascist pro-Palestine mob, or all these people that continue to do these things violently and cause disruption. They cannot find it with themselves to say that the March for Australia people were peaceful. They were doing the right thing. They listened to police instructions. They didn't cover any of that. They just and they omitted the violence by the actual group that was doing it. And is it any wonder then that people in this country are getting so sick and tired, and have been over the last 5 years, if not longer, of our mainstream media that continues to take the side of the fascist left, anti-fascist left groups that are likely funded by internationalist bad actors. And I would suspect that our politicians and the bureaucrats and the media are under control of these people. And to add to that, let's have a listen to Tony Burke quickly, and before.
However, the Home Affairs Minister has sent a message to those in the migration debate that he feels is threatening social cohesion. Speaking to the ABC, Tony Burke says the tone of the debate is as loud as a set of bagpipes.
Social cohesion really matters, and the days that people used to talk about being able to engage in dog whistle politics and you give a message and only certain people would really hear what you were saying, it's not a dog whistle anymore. It's, you know, it's a set of bagpipes coming over the hill, and you can hear it a mile off. And so, you know, we are a multicultural nation, and when people sledge multicultural Australia, there are a whole lot of Australian citizens who hear it, feel it deeply, and know that it's people talking about them.
So no, Tony, we're a multi-ethnic nation, not a multicultural nation. And the more that we allow that rhetoric to continue, the more people can continue to be misled. We have a culture. We have the Australian culture. We have an Australian flag, and we have an Australian constitution under God. And so the more you keep rabbiting on about multicultural, we have a multi-ethnic nation, and we've spoken at length about that. We appreciate all the ethnicities that made up this amazing country. But the dog whistling and the social cohesion that he's talking about, Mr. Burke, you and your Labor government, including the Liberals and the Greens, have been the biggest contributor to the breaking of our social cohesion in this country than any other group in this country. You, the media, and political groups have massively contributed to the breakdown in social cohesion in our country, and you continue to do so. And we're calling you out, and more and more people are waking up to your rhetoric. We're not going to put up with it anymore. We're going to continue to call it out because you've got it all wrong. The people that have been peaceful all along in the last 5 years have actually been good, hard-working, centrist Australians. So, not the left, not the people that have been funded by internationalist big players. So, anyway, that's where I stand. And you want to play this or something, do you, Bruce? You're bringing something up.
Yeah, I just brought up the wrong screen, or I don't think I did. I think the
you were going to bring something else up.
I think the platform did. So just give me a go on it, would you?
You're going to have a crack at something, yeah. Anyway,
Yeah,
I think they're massively responsible for the lack of social cohesion in this country, and it's not us, mate. And they continue to do so, and we're going to continue to call them out, and we're going to continue to have more rallies, I believe. So you found what you wanted to put up.
Yeah, so I just thought I'd show you this because this relates to what Tony Burke was just telling us. You know, we are a multicultural nation, and we just have to accept that. Well, that rang a bell with me, so I just Googled electorate mix Tony Burke, and it says that Tony Burke's electorate, the division of Watson, is one of the most multicultural areas in Australia, with 56% of electors born overseas and over 70% of residents having both parents born overseas. So Tony Burke is not representing Middle Australia. He's representing his own electorate, which is a microcosm of what people like you and I are questioning. And that's why they roll him out to say, no, we're a proud multicultural nation. Because if he says anything different, he loses his job as the minister for Watson, because that's it. So he's not an impartial observer there. You know, in investing terms, he's what's called talking his book. So he's whipping up multiculturalism, because if he stops doing that, then his electors will throw him out. So there you go. He should declare an interest when he tells us that.
Yep, absolutely right. Absolutely right. And as they all are, as we know, the Liberal Party, the Labor Party, Greens are all heavily funded by other players, and they're not impartial, and big lobbyist groups. So they have a vested interest in all of that. So and this is why I say, look at supporting your minor parties or your independents, even someone like me, Bruce. I'm just going to put it out there again, that reminding people that I'm running in the Legislative Council here in South Australia. So if people haven't already, and you'd like to support me, still looking for more nominators. So and then I can register. But I won't be beholden to any lobby group. I'm not beholden to any massive financial donor. I'm independent. And I will continue to be independent and call it as it is, because I'm not beholden to anybody. And this is what we need more of in the Senate and the Legislative Council. We don't need any party affiliation in there, because Australians are getting sick and tired of internationalist lobby groups and massive corporate players that have the strings of the politicians and bureaucrats that they run, and also the media. So anyway, that's my little blurb for this week. And nice to see you, Carla. You missed, I don't know if you looks like you come a bit late, Carla. So I did give Beat the Reset and Tim a bit of a plug at the beginning, Carla. So I was saying that you gave me a little bit of a poke on Facebook, and I did put it up there. So but you might have missed that, because I think you were a bit late, Carla. Were you or not? I don't know. You got to call you out. Called you out. Look out. Gonna get in trouble. Anyway, on to you, my dear friend.
Okay, I wrote myself a couple of notes while you were talking there. So what we saw there was a senior VicPol officer, and it's not a face I recognise. I don't think I've noticed him fronting the media in the past.
He was pretty
and
cranky.
That might explain why he made the mistake of telling the truth on camera. Because he did tell the truth. He said basically there was violence at these protests and it all came from the left. Now, Blind Freddie knows that's always the case. Anyone who went to the Canberra rally or any of the other ordinary middle Australia, we like it the way it was and leave us alone rallies, they felt like family outings. They felt like church outings. There was camaraderie, there was humour. You felt safe. You felt like you belonged. There was no overtone of violence at any of those things. They were ordinary, decent citizens standing up and saying, I want to be heard. Contrast that to the Palestine protests or Antifa. And I don't want you to call Antifa anti-fascist, because they're not anti-fascist. They're actually fascist.
That's why I mix it up every now and then, right? I got it mixed up.
Call them Antifa. Don't call them anti-fascist as if that's what they are. And it's true of government, actually, that almost every bill is named the opposite of what it does, such as in the US after 9/11, they introduced a whole swathe of restrictions on American citizens, and they called it the Patriot Act. They also introduced a whole swathe of things which were designed to control inflation, which they called the Inflation Reduction Act, which included a whole lot of spending initiatives that caused inflation. So, for example, anyway, back to our senior VicPol officer there. You're probably going to get a bit of a half halt over this, because you're not allowed to tell the truth, because the government is happy to have disquiet in the streets. They're happy to have Antifa in the streets. They're happy to have people throwing stuff at you, the police, because that's part of the Alinsky playbook. The way the left grabs more power, and remember that the Victorian government, state government, is the most left-wing in Australia. We are Australia's California, if not worse, here in Victoria. And it's part of the action-reaction solution thing. So the more they can get people throwing rocks at the coppers, the more riot gear they can issue to the police. So they can deploy them in future against their real targets, the aforementioned, peaceful families who are protesting loss of their rights. And they'll have a police force that's fed up and sick of it and ready to lash out. And when they're told to lash out, there's more likelihood that they will. So you're probably going to get a bit of a half halt for telling the truth there, I'm afraid. So anyway, that was the first comment. And probably what's going to follow is some sort of crackdowns on protests, which of course will be selectively enforced. So, as mentioned a week or two back, one of the ways you know you're in a third world government is you get selective policing. You have a whole raft of laws, some of which get applied to you and I as decent people, but your Antifa thugs don't seem to fall under the same laws somehow. So, you know, if you and I turn up at a protest, we'll be pepper sprayed and so forth. But if they turn up and throw rocks, at best they'll get arrested and then let out again, you know, as if they were machete boys. But it gives the government that range of powers. So there'll be restrictions on protests. There'll be increased weaponry for the police, and that might sound good. You know, who cares if the Antifa people get their protests banned? No, they won't. Like BLM during COVID, they'll have their protests, but it's you and I and a pregnant Zoe Bueller who'll be dragged out of our houses and pepper sprayed just for opening our mouths. So, so that's the first thing. Now, second thing is, whilst I saw the frustration of that policeman at basically saying, you know, we are sick of managing these protests week after week. Look, we hear that all the time, and I don't care, mate. I don't care. That's your job. If you don't like your job, leave it. Because again, that line of reasoning will be used against ordinary decent people like you and I. You know, we want to hold a protest against COVID-2 next year. Oh, sorry, you can't do it. The police are overworked. So that's not to be used as an excuse. The police job is to respond to the public, not to restrict the public to make their job easier. And we saw the ultimate example of that with the NHS in London during COVID, where they put massive restrictions on the public in England to avoid overloading the NHS. So they said to the public, you must protect the health system. No, it's the other way around. The health system works for the public. Same here for the police. It's not up to us to protect the police. The police are working for us, not the other way around. Please remember that.
Well, it seems like they're doing more work for the bloody the crazies on the bloody left than the right. I mean, how often do you see us outside bloody turning up marches and pelting people with stuff?
Never. You know, you think in Canberra, I think there was 2 arrests at the Canberra protest, and as we worked out, at least one of them was a fraudulent fit-up job because that was mine.
Yeah, that's right.
At most, what do they arrest? 1 person out of 1 million? You arrest more people at the MCG at a footy game than that.
That's right. When you consider there was a couple of 100,000 people out there, and then just had crazy Canberrians that wanted to ram other people's cars because they were a bit upset.
Who didn't get arrested, by the way.
Yeah, no, she probably wouldn't have either. Probably no charges.
Yeah. All right. On with the show.
Yeah, and what was it? And was the leader of the Socialist Party? What is he? Purple Pinger? I don't know his full name. Something what a Purple Pinger. He was saying something along the lines of, that they didn't start. The police started instigated they were peaceful. They were just retaliating against the police. I mean, how this guy is just an absolute joke. I mean, I can't believe how he can continue to get away with what he gets away with. He's the same bloke that encouraged homeless people to break into people's properties to squat there because they're vacant and stuff. So this is just the mindset of these socialists, right?
Yeah, look, I'm not going to 100% agree with you because my experience over the last few years has taught me that there are police who will instigate violence, either just because they're having a bit of fun or because that's the instructions they've been given from above. So I'm going to take that just with a little bit of skepticism anyway, because we know how we were portrayed. We know how.
Yeah, well, that's a good. Yeah. Yep. Fair enough. We weren't carrying around projectiles.
Shall we kick in then? We
shall.
So, episode 79, almost up to the 50 that we promised.
Still going, mate. Still going.
And Trish there's doing a bit of a Carla impression. Very good impression, Trish. Very good. What's your excuse? Different time zone?
Yeah, I don't know. It's funny. It's that daylight savings, isn't it? I mean, I know. I cop it a lot, having it, starting at bloody 5 o'clock when it's sort of dinner time and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, that is the way it is. That's just how it goes.
Alrighty, so where we're going this week, start off with our usual not easy being green and starting off with our usual more fires in Tesla batteries.
Mm-hmm.
A little bit of an update on last week when we talked a little bit about hydrogen. I'm just going to do a little bit of I call it a deep dive, maybe a medium dive into the physics of hydrogen storage and why hydrogen is a bad transport fuel. There's a reason why we've used what we call liquid fuels in transport for a century, and that's because they're better. So to suddenly change to gaseous transport fuels, or even worse, electricity, to power our vehicles, just because our wise rulers thought it'd be a good idea, they've both got issues with physics, because if they didn't, we've had the last 100 years to try them out and implement them. Well, we did try them and we didn't implement them because they weren't as good. So a little bit of a dive there. And an update, you might remember a few weeks ago, we talked about the closure of the US's second, what they call concentrated solar power plant. And that's where they had a vast array of mirrors in the Mojave Desert, which all beamed sunlight up to a central salt block and used it to store heat, which was then used to boil water and make steam and then electricity. Well, the story we did a few weeks ago was that plant's closed because even after 10 years in the sunniest place in the world, they just couldn't make it work. We'd be happy to know that the South Australian government believes this time it's different because they've got plans to do the same thing at Port Augusta. I'm hoping in the very least they'll be able to get some knockoff technology from California sent over. I hope they're not paying, full tote odds for new stuff, because I do know where there's a whole lot of second-hand parts for concentrated solar. All right. Big story in health. So I'm going to showcase the Inconvenient Study film, which was released by the Highwire Health Report this week. And you messaged me during the week, and I've just clipped out a few things. In short, you might remember we previously talked about US paediatrician Paul Thomas, who analysed the health of his vaccinated and unvaccinated kids and discovered, to his surprise, that the vaccinated kids had far higher rates of chronic illness than the unvaxxed, between 3 and 5 times for most chronic inflammatory diseases. And that makes perfect sense because vaccines stir up your immune system. And if they crossfire against yourself, bingo, there's your chronic illness. Well, I'm going to report on another study which shows exactly the same thing. Although this study they didn't have to retract after it slipped into publication because the author auto-retracted it. He was a vaccine supporter. When he did crunch the numbers and went, oh, wow, he just refused to submit it for publication whatsoever. So Paul Thomas vindicated, and we're going to look at that study.
Yes.
Money and finance just started. Just breaking last week was the fact that Treasurer Chalmers had backed off on his plan to introduce a unrealised capital gains tax, starting with super. And that was great because that is a corrosive tax that should never be allowed. Well, more details. He's going to make it up this week. So sure, he's not going to charge 30% on your unrealised gains, but he's going to double or triple the tax on your earnings in your super account for some of the higher income brackets. So, no, they haven't really backed off. They've just done a bait and switch here.
As I do.
And Putin watches the show because he said in 2022 that the real inflation rate is 8%.
Hello, Mr. President Putin.
Hey, Vlad.
How are you, sir? Vlad, how you going, Vlad?
We've got a story of government overreach where a proposal's been put out to reduce rural speed limits, in some places quite significantly, perhaps as low as 70 kilometres an hour on some roads. And the reason for that is for Zika height. It's for our safety. So I'm going to
Thought you'd have
discuss
something to
some.
say about that. I saw that story there, and I thought because you'd done a couple of studies relating to that about speed and safety and other sorts of things and cameras and stuff. I thought you'd have a bit to say about that.
Yep. Look, I'm going to have a look at the data behind it. And look, make no mistake, transport is a kinetic energy endeavour. It involves moving things. And when things are moving, they can collide with other things and stop and cause damage and injuries. That is what kinetic energy does. But you can't have a transport system without movement. So when we plan to restrict the movement of the transport system, we are of necessity restricting the efficiency of the transport system. So I just want to look at some of the numbers behind it. And finally, in the miscellaneous section, looks like the ceasefire in Gaza hasn't even lasted a week. And I did point out last week that a ceasefire doesn't end a war, it just temporarily suspends it. And I've dug out some quotes from the Vietnam era because it looks to me like Bibi Netanyahu's channeling General Westmoreland, who ran the war in Vietnam. He was a US 4-star. And at the end of the war, he was a bit miffed because he said, we won every battle we fought. Well, Bibi said the same thing. And I think
wasn't there some footage too of like Biden and even our own Prime Minister Albanese quoting film roles where actors like I think Michael J. Douglas or whoever like taking their roles in some of their speeches. I think there's something there from Albo. I don't know where it is. Sure, I saw something like that.
I don't want to hear from Albo if that's all right.
Yeah, no, fair enough.
If that'd be all right with you.
Yeah, before you look at this from Gail, though, what Gail's put in there, one of her colleagues had just had all their super taken by hackers over $100,000. Holy dooly. That's got to hurt something bad. Surely there's got to be some sort of insurance compensation for that to happen from the bloody whoever's held the super. But that's the future we're going to be living in, isn't it? Like they want us all to go to this digital, and they want digital IDs and all that, and they're saying, oh, it's all safe, trust us, and we've seen that government departments and major corporations continue to get hacked, and it will continue to happen as we go forward.
Yeah, and I don't know what the mechanism is behind that, but it parallels the monetary system, in fact, because the way we avoid fraud and theft with our banking system, for example, is that you and I outsource the security of our funds to someone else. And that someone else is what we call a trusted third party. And in most cases, the bank. What stops Mark Neugebauer getting onto his Westpac account, dialing up his bank account and inserting a couple of zeros and pushing enter, or a hacker doing the same thing to your account and turning them all back to zero? We've got a central party who's in the way. They're called a trusted intermediary, and their job is to stop that happening. Well, one of the key problems with that is that if that central authority has the ability to stop a hacker, for example, from stealing your funds, they also have the ability to enable the government to steal your funds. It's the flip side of the same coin. It's what I used to call the Fijian military problem. Why does Fiji have an army? It's a tiny place. Well, one of the roles of the army is to stop internal attacks on the government. It's to stop civil war against the government. But the problem is, if you've got an army that's got enough power to do that, the army itself has enough power to overthrow the government. And in Fiji, as we know, that's happened multiple times. So don't know what happened back in that case where you're just talking about. And I would want to know how it was vulnerable, because almost always there would be some sort of third party whose job is to prevent that. And if it does happen, to make you right. Now, I'm on the other side of that. I'm a responsible citizen. So I removed almost all the super that I could as soon as I could, even taking a tax hit. And I've turned it into things that I control. And we've talked about them in the past, so precious metals and Bitcoin. So I control those. I'm not relying on anybody else for the security of those assets. But the problem is I'm relying on myself. So I got no one to blame if I stuff it up. But that's the way I want it. You know, I want to be in
Mm-hmm.
charge of my money. I don't want to be trusting someone else who I can't trust.
Yeah, exactly.
And Trish is making a good point there. This is one reason why I resist any sort of. I don't give out data that I don't need to unless I'm absolutely forced to, because these central databases are honeypots. You know, we've seen Telstra get hacked of private details. We've seen medical databases get hacked, Optus, etc., etc., etc. And so if I go to Bunnings and Bunning wants to know my phone number and my email, I say, no, I'm not giving it to you. You know, why would I give, you don't need that. I'm paying you cash here. I'm walking out with the item. Why do you need to know any of that stuff?
Yeah, exactly.
And
Right.
they want it for marketing, but I don't want my data centralized. The Army taught me that. It's called the needs to know principle. You don't tell your best mate something unless they need to know it, because you're just increasing the vulnerability of that data.
100%. And as Gail's followed up there, she's saying that they left their information on their phone computer and didn't log out. So it's a sort of user error kind of thing there. So, yeah.
Okay.
There you go. And yep, cool. Carla and Beat the Reset team have said they've tickets at the door as well for that Adelaide event at the Marion Hotel as well, which we covered at the beginning of the show. Thanks, Carla.
All good. So what do you got in the contents of the show? Well, another week, another Tesla fire, it would seem. But this one was in Australia, and that's a bit unusual because remember a few weeks ago we looked up, and I think there'd been 6 reported EV fires in Australia ever. Well, we've just added a pretty substantial percentage to that, haven't we? What's that, about 17%, something like that, just with one? So,
yeah.
Anyway, what was different about this one is because unusually it occurred when the vehicle was in use, and it occurred when it crashed. And anyone who's watched the show to any extent will know that one of the defining characteristics of EV fires is they can happen anytime. And that's one of the big dangers. So it can happen in your garage. It can happen in the sub-basement of the multi-storey car park. It can happen on a ship while it's being transported. So in places where your car is going to be left unattended, and you would think, therefore, fairly low risk, fire can occur there as well. And the problem with that, of course, is there's nobody there to see it. It grows before anybody works it out. So this one happened when Tesla was involved in an accident in New South Wales. So that was unusual. But Fire and Rescue New South Wales put an expert onto the job. So their spokesman explained that the Tesla's battery went into thermal runaway following the incident, the crash, and had to be cooled for hours. Now, that's all true. But the expert spokesperson said electric vehicle fires were exceedingly rare and usually only occurred after a crash. So this expert spokesman from Fire and Rescue New South Wales obviously doesn't watch the show. We've discussed that extensively. But if you went on the responsible brigade's Facebook page, they apparently discussed the incident in some detail, and you would, because it was a big job. And they highlighted some of the things we've talked about in the past. So it said the brigade eventually used more than 20,000 litres of water to extinguish the fire and cool the wreck for it to be safely loaded on the tilt tray truck. Now, as we know, these things burn underwater. So I don't think the 20,000 litres they put on it extinguished it. I think what happened is that's how much water they managed to put on it before all the energy in the battery short-circuited and drained. Because like I say, you can't put electrical fire out by smothering it because it creates its own oxygen and heat and burns underwater. Anyhow, having extinguished the vehicle, they then had to place it in a safe area at the fire station in case of reignition. And finally, they talked about toxic gases and so forth that were involved in the fire. And I was reminded of the one takeaway phrase that I installed in my brain after I did electric vehicle fire training with the CFS in South Australia. And my take home is order 10 tonnes of water and quarantine for 3 days. In this case, they used 20 tonnes of water, ticked the quarantine box, and I don't know if it reignited. Nothing's really changed, has it?
No.
And in more Tesla fire news, apparently 4,500 Teslas have had to be recalled in Korea after a battery fault occurred which posed a fire risk. Now, fair's fair. The previous Tesla fire was ignited by an accident, and that can happen with a combustion engine vehicle. But interestingly, thousands of Teslas have been recalled in Korea because of increased fire risk. And what the story says is that the battery management system detects a fault within the battery, causing an overload and risk of fire. So that's why they are having to replace these 4,500 Teslas. And that's exactly what we've talked about previously. You've got 8, 9, 10,000 individual cells in any EV battery, and you only need a short circuit in one of them for it to heat up and create a fire. And so here in Korea, they've recognised that, yes, there's a known fault which has caused fires. So they got 4,500 to be replaced.
Well, it's a little bit nice little cost involved with that.
Yeah. Warranty job.
Well, it's probably what, 60K of 60,000 a pop, probably, if not more.
Yeah, well, my suspicion is they'll simply replace the cars because, as discussed previously, the battery pack is often half the value of the vehicle, and changing it's not particularly easy because it's in the floor pan. You've got to do a lot of disassembly. And a manufacturer like Tesla can probably make 4,500 new Teslas quicker than their overworked service and technical staff can tear apart and replace thousands of batteries. So my guess is they'll just replace them.
Bring them back, take them back to the manufacturing plant and drop the batteries, maybe get rid of them another way, put new batteries in them, whatever.
Down there, or maybe sell them cheap on Gumtree or something.
Yeah, and void any warranty. Say, if it burns, that's your problem, not mine.
Oh, I didn't get the recall. Sorry. Okay. Now, here we got an update on last week's Tomago smelter closure plan, where we discussed the fact that Australia's largest aluminium smelter is under severe threat of closure because of rising electricity prices. Okay, so what have we got here? Well, we know from South Australia's own crash test dummy state, South Australia, that there are alternatives to give you green power for smelting. And this story is about the hydrogen plant that was set up for the steel smelter in Whyalla. So the government threw $285 million worth of OPM at Whyalla to enable them to go green by setting up a hydrogen-fueled power plant rather than their dirty coal, which they blew up, or now they're weather-dependent wind and solar. Okay. But it all went bust. It all went bust, as we know. And I thought I might just briefly cover some of the reasons why it's a bad idea to use hydrogen as a fuel, particularly as a transport fuel, but just as a fuel per se, because hydrogen's been used industrially for more than a century, and certain risks have come to the fore, certain risks we know about. And one of the big risks is fire, of course, and that's obviously the Hindenburg in New Jersey in, I think, 1936. But the big issue with using hydrogen as a transport fuel is that it doesn't compress into a liquid. So if you have an LPG fired car, that's a liquefied petroleum gas car, or if you're running your hot water system at home off those 45 kilo gas bottles, or if you're running your barbecue off a 9 kilo gas bottles, in every one of those cases, that cylinder does not contain gas. It's largely full of liquid, And above it, there's a vapor phase, which you can vent off and use to run your barbecue. But because LPG can be compressed into a liquid, you can store a lot of it in a small container.
Mm-hmm.
Now, hydrogen does not turn to a liquid under any practical pressure. So to stuff as much hydrogen into a small tank like that as you can stuff LPG into it, all you can do is compress it to extremely high pressure. So to get the same amount of hydrogen in the equivalent bottle, you've got to put it at a pressure of 7,500 psi. That compares to about 75 psi in your barbecue bottle. So you've straight away got an enormously pressurized vessel there, which you then want to put in cars and drive around.
Mm-hmm.
So the fact that you have to compress hydrogen to very high pressures to store it makes it more dangerous. It makes leaks more risky because you've got huge pressure venting the gas out wherever the leak is. And in fact, with that much pressure with such a small molecule, steel containers are actually porous to hydrogen. Hydrogen will leak through steel when it's stored at 7,500 psi. So the leakage rate might be modest, but it does leak through the container. And as it leaks through the container, it damages it because the steel doesn't like having hydrogen leaking through it on the way out to the atmosphere. So there are hugely pressurized containers. You need special materials to make them. You need special materials to resist that brittling process that happens as hydrogen leaks out. And you've got a 7,500 psi bomb there ready to go bang if it gets damaged in a collision, if you drop it, if whatever. So that's the biggest problem with using hydrogen as a transport fuel rather than using a liquid as a transport fuel. And this is a great example of Chesterton's fence. So Chesterton's fence parable says, you know, two people walking along saying, what a stupid place to build a fence. Let's tear it down. But they're not asking themselves who built it and why. And that's just a little parable that says, okay, if you're already doing something a certain way, especially if you've been doing it for 100 years, you better have a pretty good reason for changing it because you've had 100 years to come up with that idea. And if after 100 years of trial and error, we think liquid fuels like petrol are the best fuels for transport, you better come up with a pretty good idea for telling us they're not and we need to change to something totally different. And environmental politics is not a good idea. And in fact, even if you want to use gas as your transport fuel, if you're using LPG, it's not really gas, it's liquefied petroleum gas, remember? So actually, even LPG is a liquid fuel. So, like I say, before we suddenly let the experts tell us it'd be a great idea to change that for political reasons, you might find that there are all sorts of physics reasons and engineering reasons why we aren't doing it that way at the moment.
And I wonder how much money it actually costs to blow up a coal-fired power station here in South Australia, and then add that money onto the $285 million that the government just of other people's money the government just wasted on that hydrogen program there, Bruce.
Yeah. Now, I don't usually highlight Dr. Dan because, as I've said before, I think he's dishonest. But what he's done here is he's mentioned the Danish autism study, which we covered quite a few weeks ago. So, Dan, if you want to go back a few programs and look through the contents, you'll find where we discussed that. So I'm not going to give it more time here. But don't fret. I do have some more autism news for you, and well, vaccine news. It's more.
He preempted you anyway, Bruce. He's given the old ex a bit of a flogging again tonight because he's preempted. He saw your intro slide of what you're going to be covering, and so he thought he'd jump in early. And good to see you, Dan. I'm actually happy that you frequent the show and you know bring the algorithms up. So good on you, Dan. Thanks for joining.
Yeah, like I say, thanks for the question, and you'll find I've already answered that question. Just page back a few shows and go through the the contents list there if you'd like.
Yeah, good on you, mate.
Now, we'll get back to that in a minute, but we're still doing the not easy being green segment. And
Jump the gun.
as discussed, the Tonopah and Ivanpah concentrated solar plants in California, actually might have been Nevada, in the Mojave Desert, both failed after 10 years of trying because the technology doesn't work. The idea that you can use mirrors on the desert floor and project sunlight up to a central point and collect the energy that way seems like a good idea. It's been tried. It didn't work. Now, fortunately, South Australia are going to do it again. So perhaps they think this time will be different. They're going to build the same sort of plant. So here's a picture of one of those two US plants. This is Tonopah, but Ivanpah was pretty much exactly the same. And here's a list of some of the reasons why concentrated solar, using mirrors on the ground to focus energy at a central collection point, here's some of the reasons why they just couldn't make it work there. First off, there are huge what they call round trip losses. And this is true of any sort of solar battery projects, and in fact, even hydraulic battery projects. If you think Snowy doesn't create energy, or Snowy 2, sorry. The plan with Snowy 2 is we're going to use wind and solar to pump water up to a higher level, and then we're going to run it back down through the turbines and get the electricity back. Now, the round trip losses, so the electricity you've got to put in to pump water from a lower level to a higher level, store it, and then run it back, you get significant losses. So these things are batteries, they're not power plants. And like all batteries, every charge-discharge cycle gives you a loss. So huge round trip losses with concentrated solar. And here's something I want you to ponder. So in order to get that mirror to focus the sunlight up at that central collection point, every single mirror has to be aligned to it. And that changes through the day and it changes through the year because the position of the sun in the sky changes constantly. So you need a massively expensive and complicated alignment system which can dynamically in real time optimize the reflection. You know, if you're trying to look in a mirror, it's got to be pointed at you, right? They also had trouble with the salt block, which collected the energy because, as we know, salt is corrosive. Anybody who's tried to do any sort of engineering in or close to the sea knows that salt water is extremely corrosive. So that is a problem. Even in the desert, they had a lot of mirror cleaning to be done because dirt, bird droppings, etc., accumulated on the mirror surfaces. And can you imagine the cleaning crew that's got to go around and clean those mirrors? And finally, as we know that these things incinerated birds visibly with what were called streamers going down in space, as birds and insects which flew through the invisible rays caught fire and crashed. And the public didn't like that, so there's a fair bit of environmental opposition to that. And I like the overall conclusion to this report, which discussed why this system just didn't work. And it said, and this is a metaphor for all green projects, isn't it? It said the technology worked on paper. In the field, it had low tolerance for design, build, and maintenance errors.
Sounds familiar with the whole renewable run out, doesn't it? Everything to do with that. I mean, we had proven, tested for decades and decades base load power generation options, and let's just throw all that out the window, Bruce, for this pipe dream.
Yep. Isn't it amazing?
And it doesn't matter because, you know, the Peter Malinowskis South Australian Socialist Labor government doesn't care because it's other people's money because they just love spending other people's money. They don't care and they want more of it. So they don't really care.
And they don't care that we've just done a 10-year trial of the technology in one of the world's best places for collecting solar energy, and it didn't work. So South Australia is going to build one. And given that they will no doubt label this as an investment, I haven't heard yet, but it's got to have been, a green energy investment. I bet you it's got to be.
Oh, it's got to be tabled that way. It's got to be framed that way. Mally's got to come up with Mally and his team and his minders have got to come up with some sort of wonderful rhetoric.
So given that it's going to be labelled an investment, I just wonder whether I could point the state of South Australia at the words of Sir John Templeton, who was a famous investor, banker and fund manager.
Mm-hmm.
And he said the four most dangerous words in investing are "this time it's different."
Yeah.
So question to Peter Malinauskas, given that we've tested this for 10 years in the Mojave Desert and couldn't make it work, what's going to be different this time at Port Augusta?
Yep. No, it's not going to be different. It's just another one of their pipe dreams because they blew up the coal-powered fire station plant, Bruce. So, but the other thing with that though is this, Bruce. Just a reminder of this. Right,
Yep.
where can and someone highlighted this? They just highlighted where Australia sits. Now, how much of that little dot there of Australia does actually South Australia contribute to the carbon emissions? So they're effectively sending our state broke. They're going to continue to use other people's money to, pursue failed pipe dreams. Affect our cost of living, undermine our energy security for what? Because they are following the globalist playbook, and I don't have a problem saying this because I can, and Liberals the same. They are all part of playing their part of a much bigger global agenda, and I don't mind saying it. Peter Malinauskas and the Labor government and the Socialists being led along by bigger players, and anyway, but we're getting sick of that, and we're going to continue to call it out and push back on that, and why we're doing things like what we're doing, Bruce. So. There we go.
And all the while, we continue exporting our coal and other raw materials to China, where they can burn it and make the CO2 emissions.
Yeah, look, that's a big thing, isn't it? I mean, look, even other people, I forget his name, the guy that he's on one of the other platforms a lot, calling out the government about in regards to their selling all our resources and all that, and not getting much for it, not getting much back. We're just virtually giving it away, and we could be paying all of our debt off if we actually charged it out at a proper rate. All our resources.
Yeah.
Yes.
Now, I'm hoping Dr. Dan's stayed with us because we are going to do a little bit of an autism/vaccination update here.
Oh, get ready for the spam. The spam's going to come in.
Although I do say the article concentrates more on other chronic illnesses related to vaccines rather than autism per se. So I do hope Dr. Dan can broaden his vision. Now, previously, we've talked about the US pediatrician Paul Thomas, whose landmark study of, 2020? Yeah, 2020, where he analysed all the patients in his practice and he compared the chronic health outcomes or the overall health outcomes of his vaccinated and his unvaccinated kids. And he did that because he was tasked to do that by the Oregon Medical Board, who discovered that he'd written a book called The Vaccine Friendly Plan, where he actually just suggested to parents that they might want to space out the shots a bit, give them a little bit more slowly rather than, great numbers in the arm at the same time, in order to reduce the aluminium load. Now, for that heresy, for saying that, maybe you should just go a little bit slower with it, he was tasked by the Oregon Medical Board with proving that what he just said was safe. Now, as he said, that was a bit ironic because they've never proved the converse, that their system was safe. But anyway, they tasked him with showing that what he was suggesting was safe. So he hired a medical statistician to go through all of his practice data for decades and crunch the numbers. And to his surprise, discovered that the chronic illness rates amongst the vaccinated kids were much higher for virtually any chronic illness you might care to name. asthma, eczema, food allergies, you name it. They were like 3, 5, 8 or more times higher amongst the vaccinated kids than the unvaccinated. So there you go. He did what the board asked him to do to show that what he was advocating was safe. In fact, he showed it was safer. And he wrote it up and somehow slipped it through the censors and got it published. Now, almost immediately that study was retracted because you can't have that sort of thing leaking out now, can we? But here are some of the graphs that just show, and we've been over this before. So the orange graph is the rate of the illness amongst the vaccinated kids, and the blue graph is the rate amongst the unvaccinated kids. And as you can see, for almost any chronic illness you care to name, the vaccinated kids had far more chronic illness than the unvaccinated kids. And that makes sense because vaccines are immune stimulants, and if you confuse the immune system by giving it aluminium at the same time, which stirs it up, it might cross-react with other things that are in the environment, such as peanuts, such as grass pollens, such as seafood, such as whatever. So it makes perfect sense. So just as a reminder, here's Paul Thomas talking about his paper. So let's just get ready for a disconnect.
No, you've done this often enough now, mate. You should get it. You should be right now. Actually, do you want to know? But I'll pull my. I'll get rid of mine. There we go. That should free up another spot there for you now that I've got.
What I noticed in the first decade or so of my practice is kids were getting sicker and sicker. And over the next decade, as more and more patients chose not to vaccinate, I got to see the difference. But I wanted to see, could I prove it? So we got all the data from my practice. We looked at every baby born into my practice and published it in an international journal of public health. What we found, and that study was peer-reviewed, it was robust, we found massive increases. I mean, we're talking 400 to 500% more. Allergies, autoimmune conditions, neurodevelopmental issues, and then we had infections of all kinds. Massively increased in the vaccinated compared to the unvaccinated. What happened when I published that study? Within days of it being available online, I get a call from my attorney. Don't go see any patients, don't write any prescriptions, don't go into the office. Your license has been emergently suspended. You are a threat to public health.
What's today?
Today, it is the last time I will be doing clinical medicine in Oregon. Knowing that you guys are keeping it going, the heart of this place lives on.
So Paul Thomas discovered the cause of the chronic illness epidemic that is ravaging Australia, Britain, America, all the highly vaccinated countries. And for his trouble, he should have been given the Nobel Prize in Medicine. Instead, he got deregistered immediately. So that's what happened to Paul Thomas. Well, this week, Paul Thomas was vindicated by another study which came out, and this was reported on the Highwire, which basically has exactly the same findings. So this study on the Highwire involved similar data. But in this case, they didn't have to retract this study because the author, having crunched the numbers and written the paper, refused to submit it, despite having said at the outset that I'll publish regardless. He was a vaccine advocate, and he was challenged to do this study using, I think it was 18,000 patients from one of their HMOs, health management organisations. So it was data there already. He was challenged and he said, yeah, I'll publish regardless. Anyway, when he found that his results were the same as Paul Thomas's, he refused to publish. And he basically said that that'll be the end of my career if I published. So he self-censored, didn't have to retract the paper. He just retracted it himself before it was even published. But this paper has come to light this week because the health program, the Highwire, has featured it. So let's have a look at what they told us about it.
And if people haven't seen that full documentary as well, I recommend watching that as well.
Let's get him started.
Publishing something like that, I might as well retire. I'd be finished.
I mean, I'm just curious. What in this data makes you think it will be as catastrophic to your career as you think?
What was he so afraid of? The study was a bombshell.
18,468 subjects, 1,957 of them were fully unvaccinated. When comparing the health outcomes of the vaccinated versus the unvaccinated, they found an increased risk in the vaccinated of several chronic health conditions. The vaccinated subjects were over 4 times more likely to have an asthma diagnosis.
4.29 times in the adjusted. And that seems, I've looked at a lot of studies, that's 3.26 to 5.65.
They also found 3 times the risk for atopic diseases,
which is kind of a subset of allergic diseases.
They found a almost 6 times risk for autoimmune disease.
The autoimmune diseases this paper looked at include thrombocytopenic purpura, rheumatoid arthritis, SLE, systemic lupus erythematosus, MS, multiple sclerosis, and Guillain-Barré syndrome. They mentioned there are over 80 different autoimmune diseases, and what their data showed for autoimmunity, 6 times increase in those who got vaccines when compared to the unvaccinated.
Which is staggering, because autoimmune disorders really represent significant morbidity and health costs and suffering, accrued over a lifetime.
Neurodevelopmental disorders.
What kind of numbers are we talking about? Do you remember?
5.5 times risk for neurodevelopmental disorders.
We know that the immune system is intimately connected with both brain development and brain functioning. And so when the immune system gets triggered by illness, potentially by vaccination, you can get neuropsychiatric symptoms, presumably related to brain inflammation and immune processes in the brain.
2.92 times the amount of motor disabilities, 4.47 times the amount of speech disorders in the vaccinated compared to the unvaccinated.
3 times the rate of developmental delay.
They found the same things I found related to allergy and autoimmunity. Also, 6 times more acute and chronic ear infections.
Interestingly, there were several health conditions where they couldn't even do this analysis because there were none in the unvaccinated group. The way that the mathematical formulas work, you can't have a 0 in any one group and be able to compare risk.
For example, there were 262 children who had ADHD in the vaccinated group. Amongst the unvaccinated group, there were 0 cases of ADHD. 0.
These ones are just mind-boggling. These conditions were not found at all in almost 2,000 unvaccinated kids. 0 brain dysfunction, 0 diabetes, 0 behavioral problems, 0 learning disabilities, 0 intellectual disabilities, 0 tics, and 0 other psychological disabilities in the unvaccinated.
I'm going to read the conclusion here. Despite this, and in contrast to our expectations, again, the author's expectations was they'd conduct the study and probably find vaccinated people a whole lot healthier than the unvaccinated, right? This is what we found. We found that exposure to vaccination was independently associated with an overall 2.5-fold increase in the likelihood of developing a chronic health condition when compared to children unexposed to vaccination.
And Dr. Dan is appealing to authority, saying that Grok says we're wrong.
Well, he's probably blocked WikiLeaks anyway, because WikiLeaks and the team of Mouse have already called out Grok's flawed analysis on lots of things, but he'd probably be too inconvenient for him on that.
And Dr. Dan, again, cannot get his... Dan, we're talking about other chronic diseases in this study. Can you just widen your focus a bit? We're talking about diabetes. We're talking about eczema. We're talking about all sorts of allergic immune diseases in this segment. Can you try and follow along? Try and follow.
It's hard for vaxophiles.
Well, yeah, and sadly, we've talked about it before. Anyway, this study vindicates Paul Thomas. It's a much bigger study and it shows exactly the same thing. The vaccinated kids have a vast array of chronic inflammatory conditions at rates that are much higher than the unvaxxed kids. And these are, I can't remember the word for it, but these are what you call the other effects of vaccination. So, as we've discussed in the past, most of the vaccine safety and effectiveness studies are very short, much too short to detect these sorts of chronic illnesses. And they only look at whether they're effective in protecting against whatever the target disease was. You know, does the measles vax stop you getting measles? When maybe they do, maybe it does. But the point is, if the cost of protection against measles, which in this day and age is in almost all cases, you know, a spotty rash for a week, if the cost of doing that is exchanging that for a lifetime of asthma or peanut allergy or eczema or neurodevelopmental delays, etc., is it worth it? So these two studies have looked not at the question, do the vaccines work? The question is, do they do something else such that the net effect is negative? And the credit for first discovering this possibility that vaccines, even if they work against the target disease, might have a net overall disbenefit because they cause other things which you don't want, all the things we just talked about, should go to this man, Peter Arby. And he ran a similar study. He was a vaccinologist in Africa back in, I think, the 60s and 70s. And he was involved in vaccinating large numbers of children in Guinea-Bissau. And he noticed a decade or two later that in that country, despite his best efforts to get all the kids vaccinated, in fact, only about half the kids did get vaccinated under these programs, and half didn't for a variety of reasons. So he again thought, I've got a perfect natural comparison group here. I've got a group of vaxxed kids and I've got a group of unvaxxed kids. Let's have a look at the overall health of those kids. And he did. And what he discovered was, again, the same as the two papers we've just talked about. He discovered that whilst it appeared that the vaccines did protect the kids against the target diseases, overall their health results were much worse than the unvaccinated kids because they had much higher rates of death from other diseases. So let's see what he had to say.
Yeah, remember, because I think he was in the documentary too, wasn't he? We had
Yes.
a bit of a short on him as well.
The reason this study is important, I think, is illustrated by a study that was done in Guinea-Bissau, Africa, by a man named Dr. Peter Paix. He's one of the lead experts.
I'll just start that again because it didn't play, did it?
The reason this study is important, I think, is illustrated by a study that was done in Guinea-Bissau, Africa, by a man named Dr. Peter Paix. He's one of the lead experts. He's pro-vaccine, and he develops vaccine programs for the third world. He had a DTP vaccine program he'd run 30 years ago in Guinea-Bissau, Africa, and recognized 30 years later, you know what, only half the children in the country got that vaccine and the other half didn't. I could do a perfect comparative study between the vaccinated and the unvaccinated. And when he did that study, the results blew his mind.
This is about vaccines, and I think it's important to recognize that no routine vaccine was tested for overall effect on mortality in randomized trials before being introduced. I guess most of you think that we know what our vaccines are doing. We don't. The program we are talking about at this time, the vaccine program, was introduced sort of in the late 70s, after the success with the eradication of smallpox, WHO made sort of the first immunization program for the low-income countries. What you comes out here, you had 2.3 times higher mortality if you are DTP vaccinated. And that is the most commonly used vaccine in the world. So the whooping cough vaccine or pertussis vaccine was associated with twofold higher mortality. You can have a vaccine which is fully protective against a specific disease, but associated with higher mortality. How is that possible?
After looking at this study, it was clear that the vaccine did protect against the diseases they were vaccinated for. The kids didn't die of diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis. Only one problem. Once they looked at it, they were dying at 5 times the rate of all of these other issues. So it was clear that though it was protecting against these diseases, it was weakening their immune systems to all sorts of other problems.
Yeah. So there we go. We've basically got 3 studies now showing that the chronic disease or the other disease effects in vaccinated kids outweigh the benefits of the vaccine. So before our critics jump in and say, well, correlation does not equal causation, these are not randomized controlled double-blinded trials, correct, they're not. And as Alex Antic discussed in the Senate recently, the experts, the vaccine experts, have banned us from ever doing definitive studies. They've said it would be unethical to do an RCT, randomized controlled trial, now, because we know these things are safe. We know vaccines are safe, so we couldn't possibly withhold them from half the study group because they're going to lose the benefit. Now, we've discussed previously, they've actually never been proven to be safe because they've done a turtles all the way down comparison of the new vaccine to the old vaccine to the one before that to the one before that, having never had a genuine control group beforehand. But let's take it on face value. If we're going to accept that we're not allowed to do RCTs for vaccines, then we've got to fall back on lesser quality studies. And that doesn't mean they're useless. I mean, the literature is full of studies that are not randomized controlled trials. And they are the best attempts you have to learn something from the data that's there. And so I've just shown you 3 studies, all of which show the same thing of the same order of magnitude. The vaccinated kids have a 3 to 6 times worse chronic health outcome or death than the unvaccinated kids. So even if the vaccines have a positive effect, they also have a negative effect, which outweighs it. If you want to see that, as I say, this is all covered in a study, or sorry, a new movie which the Highwire have released. And if you just Google an inconvenient study, I'm sure you'll find it. It's about an hour 20 long movie, which discusses in a lot more detail what I've just shown you snippets of. But the key thing is something we missed for a long time with vaccines is whether they have some higher order adverse effect that we didn't look for or can't find with the way we do safety testing, which outweighs any benefit we get, even if they work. Even if they are safe and effective at protecting you against pick a disease, tetanus, maybe they're killing you from acute asthma, allergies, autoimmune disease, etc., etc., etc. And here's 3 studies. Yes, it does appear that is what's happening.
Yep. Well, that's interesting.
Okay, now changing tacks a bit. I just want to ask, imagine I'm a visitor from space and I don't know anything about ethics or how the world works.
That's interesting. Yeah. So I just saw Valerie's post and I thought I'd jump on my X to see. They looks like they've nuked it off X. So seems like Dr. Dan's been helpful. Maybe, I don't know. Did you report it, Dr. Dan, or something? But yeah, it's just been nuked off X at the 48-minute mark. So anyway, we'll see.
They might be nuking Dr. Dan's comments.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, thanks, Valerie. But yeah, it looks like it's stopped on my end here too. So Yeah, I'm not sure how we're
As
going
you know,
on Facebook.
the live shows get recorded and uploaded on a variety of platforms. So, yep, you can go back, or really go and find the movie, An Inconvenient Study, and just have a proper watch of it. I've just shown you a few little segments there. All right, back to the next story. So, yeah, I was just saying, explain to me, assume I don't know anything about ethics and morality, but explain this to me. So, in Adelaide, an unborn baby has died after a car crash at North Plimpton. And something's interesting here is that this study is called This Unborn Thing a Baby. Aren't they not babies until they're born? Aren't they a fetus or a clump of cells or something?
Wow, how did they get away with that story? It just didn't sit in the narrative. How did they get that one slip past?
And in fact, this unborn baby must be a real person because they've been added to the road toll in South Australia. And the 71st person to die on the roads this year in South Australia. And the story says a 20-year-old Queensland woman who was 22 weeks pregnant at the time of the crash was rushed to hospital, but tragically her unborn child died as a result of injuries sustained in the crash. So the unborn child was a real person, and dying this way was a tragedy. Now, let's just change a couple of words there. Let's say that this unborn child died at the abortion centre at the same gestational age, 22 weeks or even earlier. Why is that different? Why are they not being reported to the authorities as a death? Just assume I have no knowledge of how things work on Earth and just explain that for me.
Yeah, it'd be pretty tricky.
Actually, Carla there has explained it.
Yes, very nice, Carla. Yes. Articulated better than us.
Good on you, Carla. All right.
Are
you ready for money and finance?
Yeah, we are. Yes, we are.
So we had more bad news for government money this week, the Australian dollar, because the Aussie dollar is down substantially compared to gold, down 5%. It's down nearly 1% against silver, but it's up against Bitcoin. So I guess there's a little bit of hope for the government money. But as I've said before, Bitcoin is an extremely volatile asset, can go up or down 5, 10, 20, 25% in a week, although it's onward, its trend is always upwards. You know, first I heard of Bitcoin, it was under $1,000. Now it's $170,000. So take a look at it. Just don't get bucked off by the volatility. And if you can't stomach it, look at gold and silver, which we've discussed pretty extensively over recent weeks.
Yep.
Right. Let's do these coming for your super update. And there's one of these every week as well, isn't there?
Yeah, not wrong.
So last week I outlined some of the taxes that you already pay on the superannuation. And remember, your super consists of wages that you didn't get because the deal was they would be locked up for your lifetime with tax favourability, so as you would have your own retirement nest egg for when you retired. And I remember when this came in, I think it was about 1988, because I was just starting my employed career, just getting a wage. And in lieu of a pay rise that year, they told you, you get your pay rise, but you don't get it because it goes into super. And it started, I think, at a couple of percent, and it's now up to 10 or 12%. So superannuation is not a free gift that's given to you by your employer. It's part of your salary package that you don't get to touch. And to compensate you for the fact that you don't get to touch it for decades, they gave you concessional tax treatment, but it's still taxed. So when your money that you put into super attracts a 15% tax rate, money that's in super attracts a 15% tax rate on earnings. And if you want to pull it out before your retirement age, which I think is about 65, they'll tax you 15% there as well. So we discussed that last week. But late breaking news last week is that, okay, Jim Chalmers is not going to do the 30% unrealised capital gains tax on super, which is a great idea. That was a corrosive and destructive idea that's failed everywhere it works. It destroys wealth. It forces you to sell assets to pay the government tax. So you don't have the assets anymore, just so you can pay the government. At the same time as everybody else is forced to sell their assets, which crashes the price. So unrealised capital gains tax, a corrosive theft, and the entire idea was preposterous. And the fact that the government has not been able to sneak it into super is great, because they were going to sneak it into your investment property or any other investment after that. Nevertheless, as I said before, the government are tax and spending addicts. They can't help themselves, and they will consistently hoover up more and more of your money, because the alternative is to spend less, and they just can't do it. So instead of this unrealised capital gains tax, here's what Treasurer Chalmers is going to do to get the funds. He's going to double the tax on earnings in funds that are over $3 million. And he's going to triple the tax on earnings in funds that are over $10 million. So, in other words, it's a soak the rich or eat the rich strategy again. And of course, over time, these brackets will not keep pace with inflation. And I've heard it said that people who are entering the workforce now will have multi-million-dollar superannuation accounts by the time they get to yours and my age, simply because of inflation. Doesn't mean they're rich, just means the ever-shrinking dollar has inflated the size of that. So that's an update on. They're still going to steal your stuff. They're just going to do it in a different way.
Yep. No, they're always looking for new, clever ways to steal your money from you, aren't they?
And this is a sort of a combined segment here. So this is a inflation is really 10% segment, combined with a those watching the show segment. And here it's President of Russia, Vladimir Putin, who said in 2022 that currencies, government money, is being devalued at an annual rate of 8%. So again, I don't cherry pick these numbers. When they pop up, I publish them. So again, the president of Russia has admitted that the real inflation rate is 8% around the world. It's not 2 to 3%, it's 8%. And, I think it's closer to 10, but it's certainly above what they tell us, which is 2 to 3%.
Yep.
All right, moving on to another perennial segment, the Govern Me Harder segment. And so what's the nanny state come up with this week? Well, this story tells us that they're considering lowering speed limits in rural areas around the country. And I don't know if you're aware of this, but if you're out in the country with an unsignposted road, then the default limit is 100. So you can do 100 down that road unless there's a sign that says you can't. Now, of course, you might decide that's a bad idea because of the condition of the road and use your skills as an adult to say, yeah, it might be 100, but it feels like a 70 road, so I'll do that. But that's not what this is about. This is saying that they may lower that default limit, perhaps as low as 70 in some places, and they want to do it to curb the road toll in regional areas. That's the reason for it. So to translate that, we are going to restrict your freedom further for your safety, for ihre Sicherheit, because transport is freedom, which is one of the reasons why they want us all into EVs, which they can then switch off, by the way. They don't like peasants moving around. They don't like us going down to Melbourne and protesting, etc., etc., etc. No farmer likes their livestock free ranging. So and I've noticed this myself. Many times in the past, I've been the lollipop person at a road accident or a tree down for the CFS, where we'll do traffic control, where you've got one lane blocked. And the number of people who will pull up at your lollipop sign, which says stop, and I'll wander down and say, we're just cutting up a tree. You'll be good to go in 5 minutes. the number of people who will turn around and go another way, and this is on a country road where you couldn't get down that end in less than 5 minutes by taking a detour. The number of people who will nevertheless not sit there for 3 to 5 minutes because that's an impingement on their freedom to move. So people regard that as very, very important. But here the state's going to say, we are going to restrict your freedom further for your safety. Now, you were laughing. What were you laughing about there, Mark?
Well, es ist ja für das Allgemeinwohl, you know, für ihre Sicherheit. It just seems very, it's just the 15-minute cities as well come to mind. And as Valerie just put in, the smart meters, they can turn off your solar panels, they can turn off your power. They'll restrict you, geofencing with electric vehicles. And, you talked about this traveling to Melbourne for a protest. They'll be able to say, no, you can't travel past this little point here. It's all designed for that. It's all designed. And obviously knowing that the speed limit in the Northern Territory, obviously, I think it's about 130. So, they're actually, a lot of people were saying, well, let's increase the speed limits to be able to match those sorts of speeds, but they're actually looking to try and reduce them even further. And it's all about control. Like you say, it's definitely all about control.
And just supporting what Valerie's got to say. So once they've got us all, shoehorned into EVs with limited range, we've all seen those pictures of Teslas which are charging. And on that central computer screen, there's been times it's come up and said, you're not allowed to charge at the moment because the grid can't support it. I've seen those from California. And remember, there's a couple of things they're going to add to that. They're going to add what they call two-way connectivity. In other words, your car is going to become a battery for the state. And when you're plugged into charge, you might get juice put into your car or you might get it pulled out for the greater good, depending on the state of the grid. So the greater good might be, well, we don't want you going to a protest in Melbourne tomorrow. So you might find that you've charged your EV up overnight. And when you go to get in it in the next morning, it's only sitting on 5% because the greater good did not involve you driving down to Melbourne.
That's right. Exactly right. And Carla, we did actually cover this, Carla, Bruce and I, in one of those little vacuum cleaners that went around that could listen to you and all that. And so I suggest you start wearing pants instead of a skirt.
In Bali?
Well, yeah. Bikinis anyway, isn't it? Yes, bikinis in Bali.
Might be sarong.
Well, that's it too. But we did cover the little vacuum cleaners that can listen to your conversations, and yep.
Now, I don't want to give the impression that I'm indifferent to road safety. In fact, I was a professional road safety researcher for 2 years. And in my various voluntary and paid jobs over my lifetime, I've attended literally hundreds of crashes, many severe, and who knows, maybe even 100 fatal crashes, including this one. So I'm not saying that the road toll doesn't matter, but I want to put things in context because the premise for this, we're going to reduce your speed limit push, is to make you safer. And the implication is you're not safe enough now because otherwise we wouldn't have to make you safer. Now, back in 1984, I worked in the Road Accident Research Unit at the University of Adelaide. And I went back and pulled some data. So in 1984, when I was a junior researcher in that lab, the South Australian road toll was 345 that year, and the South Australian population was 1.4 million. Fast forward to now, last year's road toll in South Australia fell to 89, so getting on for a quarter of what it was when I started in research. And the population is significantly bigger. And that is exactly mirrored by the Australian data. And it should. There's no major differences between any state. So in 1984, the federal road toll was 2,822, and last year it was 1,300. And in that time, again, the population has nearly doubled. So we've, in fact, reduced our road toll by probably 6 to 1 as a per capita level. to the point where the per capita road toll in Australia is just about the lowest it's ever been since vehicles started appearing on our roads. And that's a graph of it. That's a graph of it. So it's probably around 1/6 of what it was in the 1970s on a per capita basis. Okay. So the data does not say that we've suddenly discovered a crisis which needs to be addressed by restricting your freedom ever more. Things are already the best they've ever been, and they're pretty good.
Yeah, well, vehicle safety's improved a lot, hasn't it? So, you know, that's probably reduced it a lot, the way that vehicles maneuver and handle and how safe they are.
Yeah, we've already picked what's called the low-hanging fruit. So we've dissuaded all bar hardcore drunks from drink driving. We've introduced much safer vehicles with airbags, with better engineering, with sway control, etc., etc. And we've significantly improved the roadside environment by making breakaway poles and guardrails and so forth. So all the things we've already done have picked all the low-hanging road safety fruit. So any further improvements are incremental and will be harder and harder to get and cost more and more, because if they're easy, we would have already done them. So it's going to be hard to get major improvements without major costs, and safety costs money. Okay. There's always a price to be paid for safety, and that might be dollars, or it might be restricting your movement. And remember, the roads are a transport system. They're not a crash and die system. So there are other metrics we should be looking at when we're judging the performance of the road system, other than just how many people died last year. Yeah, it's important, not nearly as important as it used to be. But when have you ever heard when they brought out one of these initiatives and said, we want to do this for your safety? Have they ever told you what the cost is? You know, how much longer is my trip going to be? How much more fuel am I going to use because I'm going slower? How much more congested are the roads going to be because I'm going slower? And, you know, just take that point. If you halve my average travel speed, that means you double the time I spend on the road, which means you double the congestion on the roads. You know, that's why cities with traffic at 22 kilometres an hour have got busy roads, because they ain't moving anywhere very fast. So if they want to improve our safety by reducing our mobility, in all honesty, they should tell us how much they're going to reduce our mobility. And they never will. You will never find this. All they tell you is how much safer you're going to be once they restrict you even more. And that sounds rather like the COVID era, doesn't it?
Gail raises a good point. Gail raises a good point. Maybe they're looking to save money on the roads. You know, let the roads continue to be in poor conditions, so they don't have to spend. They'll just reduce the speed limit, so they don't have to fix roads.
Look, they do that now, and in fact, as far as I can tell, the commonest form of road repair in my state of Victoria is to put in semi-permanent speed restrictions in lieu of road repairs. They'll put in a sign that says temporary limit, road in poor condition, 80k, and that might be there for a year. In my state, Dictator Dan spent all his money, buying votes in inner city Melbourne, building concrete jungles. So there's no money to fix potholes out in national areas voting against Labor, is there? Anyway.
And Fabled Mansions wants to know where Dan practices, so he doesn't go there to end up in his prick or one of his pricks.
I believe he's in Adelaide somewhere. I think it might be.
No, he is in Adelaide somewhere. Yeah, one of the hospitals or something. But anyway,
and he doesn't hide who he is. I don't hide who I am.
No, he doesn't. No, he's Daniel Nino. Yeah, that's all right.
And look, I take my hat off to him. He's one of the very few people on the other side who comes to a hostile environment and engages again and again and again. So I'll give him credit for that, and I'll thank him for that. Although, like I say, he does rather tend to keep bringing up things we've already addressed and given our opinions on.
And that's right too. It doubles the could double the fatigue factor. Exactly right. You slow it down on big trips, but this is something that you said before. Kind of tricked my mind. Is that like this whole thing about not wanting us to travel to Melbourne or different national rallies? You lower the speed limit. What they want to do, just funnel us all on one major freeway in and out, and they can control it better. Because most people aren't going to travel 80 on country roads going the back way, are they? So yeah, interesting concept.
And the fatigue thing's important too. So yesterday I was at the Bend in just out of Murray Bridge in South Australia for a track day where a friend of mine was exercising his high-powered sports car, and he gave me a couple of runs. So when I was going down the main straight at the Bend at a little over 200 kilometres an hour, I did not feel the slightest bit sleepy. On the drive back to Middle Victoria afterwards, about halfway through, a couple of hours in, I thought, I'm pretty tired here. So I pulled over in Keith and had I think a 10-minute sleep in the car. And pro tip to others, I've discovered, if you're doing one of those long drives and you're tired and your head's dipping and you think, this isn't good, but you push on. Do you know what? A 10-minute sleep seems to reset me completely. So I can do 10 minutes sleep, wake up feeling refreshed, and do another 2 or 3 hours driving with all of those sleep symptoms gone. So it is worth doing. It is worth doing.
And this has come up a bit before because your mates just commented. I used to this argument about seatbelts, but Dan's just meant we mandate seatbelts, and like vaccines, they occasionally injure people. And I remember you and I spoke on the show about people making choices and adults being responsible for their own safety and well-being. And we should never ever mandate medical procedures. I mean, seatbelts and you even talked about seatbelts on one of the shows too, Bruce, from memory.
Yeah, seatbelts are not an invasive medical procedure. You are not being raped with a needle, and the benefit accrues to you. The great bulk of the propaganda about compulsory vaccines is, well, your kid will make my kid sick, or your kid will kill grandma. No, the protection of a seatbelt, A, is non-invasive, and B, it accrues to you. You don't hurt anybody by not wearing your seatbelt. If somebody benefits, it's you. Having said that, I don't think we should mandate those either. I think if people are stupid enough to drive without a seatbelt, then they, as the interested party, should deal with the consequences. So I don't think they're equivalent, but I don't think we should mandate seatbelts either. I don't think we should mandate any personal protection whatsoever. And I don't think we should bail people out if they mess it up by not doing it.
That's right. Yep. Insurance is high. If you choose not to wear a seatbelt, you put it on the insurance. If you don't get paid out your insurance and so forth, all those sorts of things. Actions have consequences, don't they? That's right.
They're called self-correcting problems.
All
right. What do we got? Miscellaneous. All right, here's a quickie story and perhaps a vision for the future. So we've discussed in the past the emergence of data centres, which would be better described as surveillance centres, these massive computer complexes that literally can double the electricity requirements of a city, vast consumers of power, are cropping up everywhere, including in Australia. And one of the problems is, how are we going to get electricity to these things, given that our grid is already struggling and we're in the midst of destroying it, dismantling it, turning it into weather-dependent power? And data centres don't want weather-dependent power any more than the Tomago smelter wants weather-dependent power. So what we're increasingly seeing in Australia and particularly the US is that the environmental concerns get conveniently forgotten when the electricity is going to Amazon or Google or one of these massive data centres. And in fact, there have been fast tracking of nuclear power plants in the US to power data centres. And this story says that Amazon is funding 12 SMRs, small modular reactors, as part of that in Washington. Now, my question is, what's going to happen in Australia? So in Australia, we've had the nuclear bad thing for a long time, haven't we?
Mm-hmm.
So what's Australia going to do in this regard? Because we can't have both. We can't have data centres and weather-dependent power. We can't even do what we're doing now, let alone double our energy requirements by putting in a data centre with a vast electric load.
Mm-hmm.
So it'll be interesting to see where we go with that.
Oh, they'll come in with a fix because they'll destroy all of Australia's manufacturing capabilities, and then they'll say, oh, you know, we need Amazon to save us, so we'll actually allow that for Amazon to come over because that'll inject much needed money into our country because Amazon will pay us a heap of money. But so meanwhile, we've destroyed mum and dad businesses and manufacturing as a result of this net zero scam, this, you know, this god of theirs, and, you know, Amazon will come and save us.
My prediction is that the weather-dependent power will be for the peasants, you and I, and if it doesn't work, too bad, we're only peasants. And the massive gas plants, maybe they'll re-allow coal, and nuclear will go to the data centres. So the reliable energy will go to the surveillance centres and the peasants will get the scraps. That's what I expect.
Yep.
All right, next MISC. So the MISC, this is an update on last week's story about the war is over in Israel after the ceasefire. And I made the distinction. I made the distinction that a ceasefire is not the end of a war. It's only a temporary cessation of hostilities. And even if it persists, it still ain't the end of the war. So we talked about that. And in fact, that temporary cessation of hostilities seems to have not even lasted a week because there's been significant IDF bombing in Gaza in the last couple of days. So the ceasefire has been broken already. So I guess that means the war ain't over already. And an update on last week's question, which is if the war is over, and I argue that it wasn't, but if it is, who won? And I reminded you of the words of Henry Kissinger, and he talked about the asymmetric victory conditions for regulars and guerrillas. And he said, the guerrilla wins if he does not lose. The conventional army loses if it does not win. And again, by that metric, Hamas has won the war if it's over. If there is a winner, it's Hamas, because Hamas has been out on the streets carrying arms in Gaza since the ceasefire. And in fact, there's been disturbing vision of them executing other Gazans lined up on their knees for crimes, war crimes committed during the war with Israel. So Hamas is very much still a presence in Gaza. So by Kissinger's metric, the guerrillas have persisted by winning. So they're still there. Hamas has won. That's another example of it.
Yeah, and you've talked about this plenty of times. It's like all the children and wives or people that have been killed over that period of time with indiscriminate bombing and shelling and so forth. They've just going to be future guerrilla fighters, aren't they? It's just a perpetual war, isn't it?
Yep, and you just create more.
Yep.
Okay, anyway, further to that theme, here's another prescient quote from Vietnam, which is attributed to General Westmoreland, who was the US four-star who ran and lost the Vietnam War for the US. And he said after the war, militarily, we succeeded in Vietnam. We won every engagement we were involved in out there. Now, that struck me because Bibi said the same thing. So during the week, Bibi said, everywhere we fought, we won. So Westmoreland, who lost Vietnam, claimed to have won every battle, and he did. And there's an apocryphal story that says two colonels met after the war. I mean, it was attributed to Westmoreland, but probably not him. It was probably a US colonel and his North Vietnamese counterpart. And the US colonel made the same complaint. He said something along the lines of, you know, you bastards never beat us on the battlefield, not even once. And the guerrilla sort of screwed up his face and said, true, but irrelevant.
Yep.
And it makes exactly the point I've been making. So I think Vietnam has a lot to tell us about this conflict and how we assess who won. And in fact, we have another prescient quote regarding Vietnam from Marshall McLuhan, who was a Canadian journalist and media analyst. And he said, Vietnam was lost in the living rooms of America, not on the battlefields of Vietnam. And that's exactly true. And that's why the 4-star Westmoreland could say, well, we won on the battlefield. And why the North Vietnamese colonel could say, true but irrelevant. The war was not decided on the battlefield. The war in Gaza was decided on the television screens of Europe and the West, because that's where Israeli support comes from. So perhaps surprisingly, this is a picture of the side that won the Gaza war, not Israel. Because just like in Vietnam, the pictures told the story. So the picture on the right, very famous picture from North Vietnam. Walter Cronkite said this probably turned the war. And that was a little 12-year-old Vietnamese girl. Her clothing was burned off in an napalm attack. And you can see these terrified kids running down the street. So that picture on the US television screens in the late 60s, early 70s, cost the US the war. And the picture on the left is a similar theme, which has also cost the war in the current setting.
Yep.
So.
Yep.
Right.
Tragic
and
stuff, mate.
To finish. Bit of movement in the political scene this week with Barnaby Joyce apparently saying that he's not going to rerun for his national seat, and also throwing out some bait, clearly suggesting that he may be interested in porting over to One Nation. And there have been a few politicians who are sort of either have done or are looking in this direction. So Nationals and Liberals, and I think this would be a home for disaffected Conservatives who have no home in the Liberal Party anymore. And Leake, in his inevitable style, has beautifully illustrated this. So the problem with the Conservatives these days is they're doing a Labor light strategy. So rather than being true Conservatives, they're trying to be soft lefties. And the problem with that is the same as the problem with beer drinkers. If you're a beer drinker, you want to drink full strength. Why are you going to drink Bud Light when you can get full strength out of the tap? So in other words, people who want to vote Labor will vote Labor. They won't vote Liberal or National because Liberal or National adopted some Labor policies, such as net zero. And Pauline knows this. Some of the Nationals know this. And perhaps this is the natural home for Conservative politics in Australia. We've talked about the fragmentation of freedom parties. Maybe it's time they all jump ship and join One Nation. Worth a thought.
Interesting. Too much ego, though, I think, and narcissism. I think that's probably half the problem.
Well, I'd like to see Jacinda Price there. I'd like to see Barnaby there. I'd like to see Matt Canavan there, Andrew Hastie. I'd like to see Senator Antic. You know, I said to Antic a long time ago, I know you think the way to fix this is to fix the Liberal Party, but after what Liberal named parties did to us during COVID, they're not getting my vote, even if you've got a Liberal badge.
Yep.
I'm not in his electorate, but no Liberal is getting my vote ever again, even if they're a decent Conservative politician like Senator Antic, because you are carrying a poison flag. And I mean, has anybody got any illusions here that we're not up for at least another term of Labor after this one? Of course we are.
Of course we
South
are.
Australia and federally, Labor are getting back in next time because the distance to climb back is too far, however bad the incumbent government is up until then. So now might be the time to jump ship and start establishing a real Conservative party. And I would note that One Nation now gets more votes than the Greens. I think it's 12% to 11%. So they have grown markedly. And perhaps we should all think about, okay, rather than going for the purest freedom party, pick a name, One Australia Party, whatever, maybe we need to join one of the good but not perfect Conservative parties that's got a track record for existence and persistence.
Yep. Yeah, there's definitely food for thought for people there. Everybody, that's all, folks.
Now, if you could waffle for just another minute, that'll bring us out to 2 hours.
We're over 2 hours. We've cracked the 2 hours. It's already in. It's all right.
I've got 6:59. What do you got?
I don't know. You were running behind 2 hours and 16 seconds, 16. Yeah, something like that. But anyway,
Nailed it.
But you raise a good. You do raise a good point, and that's the same here. And as you know, South Australia, March. There's good Conservative politicians within the Liberal Party. Ben Hood is one of them. Stands out. He's a real clear standout. But at the end of the day, people are. You've still got people like was it Josh Teague in there and others. The Liberals are massively on the nose, and even if you have got good Conservative. Conservatives within the Liberal Party here in South Australia. Unfortunately, the brand is shot to pieces, and it's going to take a long while back. Look, maybe, and I've talked about this, considering about, where I go in March in regards to preference recommendations and stuff like that. I'm not going to tell people to number in any certain way, but I'll definitely be putting people there, in particular in the Legislative Council, and it may end up being that, I'd say, to people, if you run out of people, well, then look at your decent candidates, someone like Ben Hood, last in that lot. But at the end of the day, I think it's going to be a long stretch to try and get people confident again to go towards the Liberal Party. So Labor, Greens and Liberal on the nose with many of the people in our circles anyway, within our echo chamber, I suspect. But we'll see what happens. But I do agree. I do believe that Labor Malinowskis will well and truly romp it in again in March for sure. So I don't disagree with that at all.
Also known as it has to get worse before it gets better.
Yeah, yep. I mean, I'd love to see, obviously, the Greens get diminished further. I'd like to see, maybe the Labor get diminished further. I mean, for me, the biggest thing will be the Legislative Council. If we can take away the power in the Legislative Council and have, good people like, Carlos Coimbra there, and you've got the candidate for Family First and others. I'm going to obviously give it as good a crack as I can. And at the end of the day, if we can reduce the power of Labor in the Legislative Council, well, then that makes it a little bit harder for them to rush through legislation and bills in the way that they have been doing it. So anyway, I'll see.
And a reminder to people, brush up on the electoral process. Topher Field's done a couple of great videos on preferential voting. And if you still want to vote number one for a pure Freedom Party, such as Mark, by all means do so, but pay attention to your preference flow, because the chance of Mark winning his seat is low. Let's not lose that vote if he doesn't. Make sure that your preference flow will direct that vote to a realistic Conservative Party that can capture the quota, the seat, whatever. And what we were talking about is I rather think my read at the moment is One Nation seems to have the front running there amongst the big Conservative parties.
Yeah, I agree. And before people start running, jumping down my throat saying, why don't I jump in the party? Well, I've explained that before. I like the concept of, that's why I'm involved with Australians for Better Government. I do believe that the Senate, the Federal Senate and the Legislative Council need to be independent. It's a House of review, and I'd like to see it eventually be full of independence, and that's one of the reasons why I didn't align myself. And people say, oh, well, you're broadening the field and all this sort of stuff. Well, anyway, we'll see where it goes. So that's my reasoning. Whether people like it or not, want to support or not, that's the reasoning behind it.
Good-o.
Good-o, everybody. Well, hope you have a wonderful week. Thanks again, Master Bruce. And we've shortened it a little bit this week, so it's not too bad. So thanks, everybody, for your comments. Even Dr. Dan, appreciate you jumping in, and we'll go and check out the amount of spam in my X account to see why that's been nuked off there. But anyway, uploaded on the Substack. It's on the Rumbles. It's on the Cafe Locked Out Rumble. It's on the South Australia in Focus Rumble, and it'll obviously be on the Substack for good. They get deleted off Facebook after a little while, but you know where to find us. All right. Good on you, everybody. Take care. God bless.
See you next week.
See you next week.
To fight again for that already burned, it was driven towards the flames. All the signs are there for all to see, the signs we've lost our way. When we jail our heroes and applaud our villains and turn our hearts away, like a silent choir, too scared to sing the anthem of a braver day. A song our children may never hear, the ballad of Dr. Bruce Paix. A song our children may never hear, the ballad of Dr. Bruce Paix.